Hello, this is Carrie Davis. In this video, I wanted to give you a little tour of the Chapter 1 homework. So I've already logged into Connect and opened the Chapter 1 homework assignment, and we'll see that the first question here asks us to select the aspect of accounting associated with the following activities. And so we're going to click here and see that you get a drop-down box. So some of the problems want you to select things in a drop-down box. Some of them want you to do calculations and enter things into the boxes. So we're going to go through Chapter 1 homework and see how we do each of these briefly. Some of them we'll spend more time on, some of them we won't. So the first one, we're just going to pick the drop-down and we're going to select an answer here. And we've been doing something similar to this in our video assignments already. Your ebook is available over here, and you've got your check your work function available up here in the corner. So you use the drop down to answer this question. We're going to move on to the next one. That was a pretty easy one. This one, very similar. We've got some questions, and we're going to answer it by selecting internal or external user here. The one thing to watch out for in number 2 is that there's a part A and a part B. So you can maneuver between part A and B with the tabs, or you can also fill in part A and then it directs you to go to part B here, or you can go back to part A down here underneath it as well. So whether you're using the tabs or whether you're using the blue arrow buttons down at the bottom, you can do that. Okay, let's look at number 3. Number 3 is another drop down. Number 4 is another drop down as well. Those I think you'll get the hang of pretty quickly. Okay, let's look at number 5. Number 5 wants us to determine the missing amount from each of the separate situations below. So 1, 2, and 3, these are separate and they are not connected. Now, look over here to the side. We have an additional box here. This references doesn't really tell us much. It references the learning objective and that it's medium level difficulty of the problem. So the references doesn't really help you out really with doing the homework. The ebook does. You can access the ebook directly from here. But now you've got a hint. And so if you don't know how to work this problem, you can watch the hint video. So you click hint, it opens up over here on the side, and we'll click play.
Determine the missing amount from each of the separate situations given below. Letter A, liabilities of $145,000 plus equity of $47,000 equals total assets $192,000. Letter B.
So in the video, it showed you how to complete letter A. It will also show you how to complete letter B and C. I'm going to walk you through it myself as well, but you have the hints videos out here to help you know how to do that. So we'll close this when we're done with the hint, and then we'll go back over here. So the video did not have the same numbers that you have, but it showed you a similar problem, and so you should be able to get the answer after you've done that. So as we discussed in class, assets are equal to liabilities plus equity. So when we are given liabilities and equity, we should be able to figure out the rest of the accounting equation. So if we take 53,000 plus 21,000, we will get 74,000, which is the answer to that question. Now, assets in the second one are 120,000, and we have 42,000 in liabilities. So what must be our equity? So we have 120, we subtract the 42,000 from it, and our equity must be 78,000 to make our accounting equation balance. So we can double check that by saying 42,000 plus 78,000 is 120,000, which is what we have in the assets, so we know we did that one correctly as well. All right, I'll leave number 3 for you to figure out for yourself, and we'll move on to the next one. Here we are using the accounting equation, and we have required A, B, and C. The information for A, B, and C is up here at the top. It's also here in the middle with each one. So when you click on B, it switches to the B language up here, and C has the C language. So again, you're just filling in empty boxes of information that it's asking you for. So in A, it says, at the beginning of the year, Addison Company's assets were $181,000, and its equity, across the top here, is $135,750. During the year, assets increased by $80,000 and liabilities increased by $45,000. What is the equity at the end of the year? So it is telling you information here and basically asking you to get this yellow box, but you need to fill in other information here. So remember, the accounting equation always has to balance, and so we would just have to figure out the parts and pieces. So beginning balance, let's figure that one out first. We have $181,000 in assets, and we have $135,750 in equity, and we know to figure out liabilities, we need to take the assets minus the equity, and our liabilities at the beginning of the year must have been $45,250. Again, we can validate that by taking the $135,750 in equity and adding the $45,250 in liabilities and getting $181,000, which is the assets number. So we know we did that line correctly. Then it tells us in the problem that assets increase $80,000, and that has already been added in here to the change line. Assets went up $80,000, and that liabilities increased $45,000. That's already been changed, entered there in the change as well. And if assets always have to equal our liabilities and equity, what must equity have increased by as well? So I need to take $80,000 increase in assets minus that $45,000 increase in liabilities. I end up with $35,000 that equity must have increased. Now, I'll add my assets and liabilities and the equity, and then across the bottom I need to make sure that the accounting equation still says equals assets still equals liabilities plus equity. So $181,000 in beginning assets plus $80,000 in assets added means that I should have ending assets of $261,000. $45,250 in liabilities plus the $45,000 we added during this period would mean that my liabilities are now $90,250. And then let's look at equity. I had $135,750 in equity plus the $35,000 I calculated must have been added to that, which means my equity should be $170,750 at the end of the year. Now, again, we just need to make sure, though, that the accounting equation is still balanced on this ending line. So does liabilities of $90,250 plus the equity of $170,750 still equal the $261,000 in assets? And yes, it does. My liabilities plus my equity equal assets of $261,000. Now again, you've got tabs here, or you can maneuver down here to do this again in required B and in required C. So it's just an exercise of filling in the missing parts of the accounting equation. All right, let's move to the next one. This one is a problem like you're going to see on your first exam. So what we're doing here, this is transaction analysis like we did in the chapter 1 slides. And on every line, excuse me, on every line you will be affecting at least two things. Remember when we did transaction analysis for the lecture, we said that every transaction affects at least two accounts. So we're going to go through here and we're going to look at the first one. Owner invested $61,000 cash in the company along with $13,000 of equipment in exchange for common stock. What accounts are involved in this transaction? So go down to our table, our accounting equation table here. We say, okay, $61,000 in cash. Cash must have went up $61,000. They also got $13,000 in equipment, so I'll go to the equipment column and put $13,000 in there. And then in exchange for common stock. So common stock's on part of equity, and it's on the other side of the equal sign. So assets, $61,000 plus $13,000 in equipment that the company now owns must be equal to liabilities and equity. And so common stock is the only other account involved in this, and that must mean that equity goes up by $74,000. Okay. So the next one, the company paid $3,000 cash for rent of office space for the month. And so in this case, what's happening to cash? Cash is going down because the company's paying cash. And so when I enter this one, I need to put a negative in front of it, minus $3,000 in cash. It puts it in brackets, which is the accounting way to recognize that that's a decrease or a negative. And then over in the rent section, notice we don't actually have a rent section. What is it? Rent is expense, and so we're going to group that in expense. Now, expenses decrease equity, but they increase the actual expense account because we're accumulating expenses so that we know how much expenses we have. So we don't actually have to enter the expense as a negative. You can see that the Connect has already put the negative outside the box for us to reflect that expenses do in fact decrease equity. So we're just going to enter this as a positive number. Okay. So we keep going through all of these and entering them on the lines. It automatically calculates the balance of each of our accounts afterwards, and we're just making sure that the accounting equation stays in balance. Now, one thing you'll notice in doing the homework is that often we end up with a banner when we check our work. Let's see, we're going to check our work here. I'll show you the example. So we got a bunch of green checks because we did those first two right. And it says answer is not complete. When you're doing these tables, and there's one more in this homework, when you're doing the tables, answer is not complete generally indicates that you've missed entering something in one of the boxes. So what we want to do here is remember that we should have at least 2 accounts affected for every transaction. So a good way to check and figure out this answer is not complete is to go line by line and say, have I entered the number of the transaction in at least 2 spots on every line? So that's a good way to check that. Okay. Now, I think we are done reviewing this one, so let's return to our questions, get out of that check your work screen, and then we will move on. One thing before we do that, 8, 9, and 10 are connected and they are financial statements. We're going to go over that in just a second, but I want to skip to number 11 for a second because this is the second big table. Again, I mentioned a minute ago, this table is done on the exam as well. So when you do the chapter exam, be prepared to do one of these, and it is worth a large chunk of the points for the exam. That all of the exams for the chapter typically have one of the big problems out of the homework as one you will redo on the exam, and they're usually for very large points. Can be up to 50 or 75% of the points just to work the one problem. Okay, so on this one we're going to do the same thing, and I just wanted to point out here that on October 10th, this company hires a part-time assistant. So this one's a little bit of a trick question for you. Hiring an assistant does not mean that we have an accounting transaction. There are business events and business transactions. Some events are not yet transactions that have to be recorded into the accounting system, and this is one of them. Just the act of hiring an employee doesn't mean there's a transaction to record. So don't get hung up here. If you hire a part-time assistant, there's no transaction to record. All right, let's go back to number 8, 9, and 10. Here we are doing financial statements. And you are given at the top of the screen a list of accounts, and you have to figure out which financial statement they go on. Over here, you also have a hint video, remember, so you can go look at that. So one way that you can do these is you can go through this list, and you can switch between 8, 9 is statement of retained earnings, and 10 is your balance sheet. Remember, we got to do these in a particular order. So you can switch between them and just go line by line and say what financial statement does cash go on? Okay, it goes on the balance sheet, so I need to go put it on the balance sheet. What account or what statement does accounts receivable go on? That's also an asset that goes on the balance sheet, so I'd go put it over there. Or you can look through here and say, okay, I know what goes on the income statement as revenues and expenses, so I need to find which one of these, or which of these, not just one, which ones of these are revenues and expenses. So that's the approach that I'm going to take today. Also, you've got to have a good header. So in the header here, you're going to pick, is the income statement a period of time statement, meaning it's only representing December 31st as of December 31st, or is this a period of time statement? Point in time versus period of time. This is a period of time statement. The income statement covers a month, a year, a quarter, and so it's going to say for the month ended December 31st. On the next line, it wants us to pick, what are we putting on here? So revenues would be there, and then down here in this box that goes all the way across, we would be selecting expenses. That go, revenues and expenses are what are presented on the income statement. So under the revenue section, I need to figure out which things up here are revenue. And if we'll look, we'll see consulting revenue. You can look through the list, but I'll tell you that's the only one there in this example. And we can just start typing consulting, or we can scroll down, and we're going to put the amount, $13,140. And then if we look, there's no other revenue up here. So see that there's extra revenue boxes. That does not mean you have to put something in there. It's just giving you room, almost just to kind of trick you and throw you off a little bit. So so it's okay to leave these blank. There's no other revenue, so we'll leave those blank. Now we're going to go to expenses. And up here in the top, you'll see that there's rent, salary, telephone, miscellaneous. All of those are expenses. And I'm going to enter those into the table below. Now that I've gotten those titles and amounts entered, you will see that again I have extra space down here, and I don't have to worry about it because I know that I've gotten all of the expenses, and these are okay to leave blank. Now on the bottom line, it wants a label. So remember, the income statement is not just revenues minus expenses. It is looking for a result called net income. So we're going to pick net income, and then we're going to calculate what our net income is. It's the revenues of $13,140 minus the expenses of $10,340, and that's going to give us net income of $2,800. Now, if we had forgotten and left that blank, when we go to check our work, it would say we'd have all kinds of green checks again, and we'd have our net income down here, and it'd say answer is not complete. So sometimes when it says answer is not complete, we're simply missing something as simple as a line description. So sometimes I say click in all the boxes and see if something doesn't pop up as a different an option that kind of clears that up for you. Okay, you will do the same thing for retained earnings statement. Look up here at the top, see which ones go in the retained earnings statement. Remember, your ebook is available, so go back to the ebook and look for examples of retained earnings statements and balance sheets and income statements to help you figure out how to present these. And again, you can also use the hint. Okay, I think that is the quirky things to kind of walk you through for the homework. Remember, you can save and submit and come back to it, or save and exit and come back to it later, and you can submit when you are complete. Please let me know if you have any questions.